Let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. This is good to see the turnout. Thanks for coming. We're going to take a look at the new Outlook for Mac. My name is Sundar Raman. I'm a program manager on the Outlook for Mac team. In the audience, I have Rob Daly with me, my colleague. He's a group engineering manager. Towards the end of the session, Rob will be joining me. We can take your questions. I think we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions that are broadly applicable, come by and talk to us. Or we'll be at the Outlook booth in the expo hall as well through the remainder of the week. So before we get started, how many of you guys actually use Outlook on Mac? Brilliant. That's everyone. And how many of you have tried the new Outlook for Mac? Excellent. Wow. That's very impressive. I'm happy. I think what I have here will give you a bunch of context. If you haven't tried the new version, hopefully this will give you enough to go download the free preview and try it out. And if you are using it, you'll get some insights on what we had in mind when we got through the release and what we have coming up next. And of course, a chunk of the session is going to be actually showing the new version. So with that, let's get started. Here's what we're going to cover today. I'll just briefly go over a little bit of history and timelines, and then jump into the new version of Outlook, go a little deep on the key investments that we've made, and then what we've been doing in the last couple of months. And towards the end, I'll cover where we're going next and some resources as well. So a brief history of Office on the Mac platform. Of course, we've been around on the Mac platform for a couple of decades now. The first version of Office that had mail was in 1989, so it's been there for a while. And Entourage shipped in 2001. And by the time we got to 2011, which is probably the version you guys are using mostly, other than the folks who have tried the new version, that was the first version for Outlook as a product. What we started from Entourage was modernizing the app, getting to Outlook, and we continued that journey with the new version. Essentially, what we've gotten to is a solid foundation that we can build on and add more value in the future. From a release timeline perspective, I've gotten a couple of questions today and yesterday at the booth. Here's where things are. On the top, you see 2011. The last major service pack we did was in early 2013, adding the subscription support. And since then, we've been releasing updates to 2011 every other month. So it is still we continue to support that. And on the bottom timeline, you see that we have the new version of Outlook. We started with a technology adoption program earlier on, late 2013, and then through the remainder of 2014, we ran this and then eventually opened up to a beta program with about 70 or so large customers with pretty massive deployments. So we got some really good feedback. We were ready to get the product out. And then we hit the RTW, the release to web. So that version we shipped to Office 365 subscribers. So what that means is that anybody who had an Office 365 client subscription could access the bits. And since then, we've been working on regular updates. I'll touch upon the actual updates that we made. But if you guys are using the product today, you'll see that we're about every month we get an update out. So far, we've gotten 4 updates out since we shipped last October. And then, of course, the same bits are included in the free Office preview that we released as a suite. So now, in March, we shipped Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and OneNote included as a free preview. It is still a preview. There is a free trial in there. The bits for Outlook are exactly the same. Outlook is a shipping product, so we've been shipping since October last year. And we continue to make those updates. So we'll get into the updates part next. Before we get to the updates, actually, let's start with the key investments in 2016 itself. We started with 3 core pillars or key investments for the version that shipped in October. The first bucket which is super important to us, was performance and reliability. For folks who are using 2011, we acknowledge that there is a bit of pain to deal with. We had database corruption issues and the overall performance issues, and that's the key area which we wanted to fix completely in the new version. So I'll jump into the details of what that investments were in the next slide. The second bucket was around modernization. This included modernizing the app itself, both the code, moving that forward, as well as the user experience. And the third bucket was all the value that you get when you're connecting to 365. Outlook is primarily a 365 client. It is a service-connected app. Not that it won't work with on-prem. Of course it will. But you get a lot more value add if you're a 365 customer. And you'll see that more and more going forward. You might have seen other sessions covering groups and clutter and features like that. Those are value add that will come. So jumping into the first bucket, the performance and reliability, there were two major areas of investment here. As I said, we wanted to get the foundations right and ship 2016, and then we can add more feature and value add. So in that, it started at the database. 2011 had a proprietary database, so we've completely replaced that with industry standard SQLite database. What that means to you is that you get a much more reliable experience. We're able to recover from errors without needing user action, which means that rebuild, as it exists on 2011, is a thing of the past. I'll pause there. If you want to applaud, that's fine. Thank you. And I'll move to the top bucket. The second big area of investment was the threading model. 2011 is a single-threaded app. What that means is that you see hangs or beach balls occasionally, or more than occasionally. And that's another area that we want to focus on. The new version is a multi-threaded app. We use Apple's Grand Central Dispatch. So what that means to you from a user perspective is that it'll reduce the hangs and beach balls. We are trying to eliminate them. So if you're using the preview or the 365 release and you run into those issues, I'll get to the end on how you can report that feedback back to us. And the second nice thing about the threading model is that overall the app feels much more fast and fluid. It didn't stop at the threading model itself. We've done a lot of work on core areas like the mail item list on how we connect to the database and pull information up. So for large mailboxes where 2011 would suffer a lot more, the app on 2016 feels a lot more fluid. So around modernization, there were several areas. This is the one thing that you'll notice if you look at 2011 and then start using the new version. The app feels much more modern in the sense of it feels familiar. Because especially if you're coming from Windows Outlook 2013, the first thing you'll notice is that the app is very, very familiar. And what this included was the updated look and feel, completely new ribbon, icons, Retina support, all that's included in there. And there is a new module bar at the bottom that I'll show. As I mentioned, we have an improved message list, not just the UX around it, but also the performance around it. And there is an improved signatures experience, which if you're using 2011, I hope you'll appreciate. And we are a communications app. So accessibility is very important to us. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all the things we wanted to in 2011, so we continued that journey. We have much better keyboard access in the new version and voiceover support. I'll cover that in the demo as well. And this is another area that I think Apple platform folks will appreciate a lot. We have new mail notifications in the notification center now. So that was one of the areas that we've been requested to add for a while. So all these have two core tenets behind them. The first one, and this applies to all of Office products actually. The first one is the part where the apps are unmistakably Office. What that means is that when you move across platforms, you know that you're using an Office app. You know that you're using Outlook. And the second part that is important to us on Outlook for Mac is it's platform appropriate. So we not only invest in reducing the feature parity difference between Windows Outlook, OVA, and Mac Outlook, but also go after things that are platform appropriate, like the notification center, and more things like that to come. And the last part here is, as I mentioned, the foundations was not just in the underpinnings, but also modernizing the code. So we've completely carbon-free now. We have a modern Cocoa UX. So that is also very helpful for us to move forward and play nice in the Apple ecosystem. And the last bucket here is the Great with 365. As I mentioned, there's a lot of value add that we'll continue adding if you're a 365 customer. That is, you're connecting to Exchange Online. The first thing here is online archive support. Again, quite a requested area. So if you're using archives and your mailbox is archive enabled, we automatically configure that. The second thing for Exchange especially is the master category list. What that means is that if you apply a category to any item in your mailbox on Exchange connected mailbox, then it actually syncs back to the service. And that works with your on-prem installation as well as the online version. And for folks who don't know, we use a different protocol from the rest of the Office app, especially Windows Outlook. We use something called Exchange Web Services, EWS. And this gives us a bunch of benefit, and it gives us a little bit of downside too, because it's a different protocol. There is sometimes differences in support on what's supported on EWS, but that's also another area that's changing for Exchange and Outlook in general. All the new functionality is being lit up in EWS, so there is no more of the delay going forward that you'll see where things don't, or we cannot light something up on Outlook for Mac. That gap is also closing. A big area here, which personally I like a lot, is we have push mail support. In 2011, we used a polling mechanism, which means that we ping the server every 30 seconds to check if you have new mail. In the new version, we have a hanging connection with Exchange, and we get notified when new emails come in. Thank you. And the last bucket, you've heard about that in the keynote and other sessions like the Windows Outlook session, if you guys attended that yesterday. Large investment around apps for Office. What that is HTML5 and JavaScript-based apps. And of course, the primary emphasis behind that is cross-platform. It lights up in Mac Outlook just as it does in OVA and in Windows Outlook. So I talked a little bit about the updates. As I mentioned, we've released about 4 updates since we actually RTW last year. And there were a couple of key goals for these updates, and this continue to be the goals going forward too. The first thing, which is very important for us, is shipping high-quality updates. So stability is very important. We have a brand new telemetry system built into the new version. What that means is that if you send us crash reports or if you experience beach balls and you've opted in, then we get that feedback and we look at the core areas that we need to tackle on every update that we put out. So we take the top set of issues and start addressing them every update. So that is a pretty big investment. And the second bucket is, of course, features. And I'll explain a little bit more about the buckets in how we think about the features on a future roadmap. And here's the actual updates that we've done since we shipped last October. I'll just walk through a few of these. The first one in December included calendar color. You have all the calendar tiles showing up in your calendar. Of course, we still support categories, so if you apply a category, it'll show in the right color. But this also means that you don't have to look at the same blue shade or gray shade if you don't like it. You can change it to some other color. And as I mentioned, the second bucket here is around accessibility. So when you compose an email and you insert an image, you can add alt text to it, which is, again, a big ask from accessibility standpoint. And I'll jump to the March update there. We shipped side-by-side calendars. So we started with adding just support for calendar colors, and now we have side-by-side calendars. Again, this is one of the top requests. You can see up to 3 calendars side-by-side in Mac Outlook, just as you would with Windows Outlook. And the last one, this just shipped last month. So if you guys haven't tried the latest update, 15.10, I was trying to think, it has proposed new time. Again, quite requested feature. So before we get into the next part and take a look at the product itself, looks like most of you are familiar with this part, so I'll go through this quickly. But how do you get Outlook? Somebody stopped by earlier and asked me this. So the first way is if you have an Office 365 subscription, you already have access to it. To be clear, you have to have an Office 365 client subscription that includes the desktop apps. So you get Windows Outlook, and Mac Outlook is included there as well. To learn more about that, just go to office.com. That's even if you're using it from a personal standpoint at your home machine, or from a consumer standpoint, or if it's for commercial use. All those options are explained up there. And the second one, for folks who did not raise their hands on trying the new Outlook, try the free preview. The link is out there. The deck's on the Ignite Yammer. But the easiest way to find it is just type Outlook for Mac Preview in your favorite search engine. And after you download the bits, there's a button there for free trial, and you can use the product. So it's exactly the same bits. And if you go through the free trial, or if you're using a subscription, remember that the subscription is only used for activating the product. Once you activate the product, you can connect to Exchange Online in 365, or you can connect to on-prem Exchange services too, as well as your personal email clients like Gmail or Outlook.com using IMAP. Okay, with that, let me jump into showing a demo. All right. First, before we actually take a look at the product, I wanted to walk you through the sites and the resources that I just mentioned. This is office.com. It redirects you to this page. You can click on See All Office Options, and this will explain the consumer subscription options. And if you click on the options for business, this explains more about the commercial Office 365 subscription. And if you are an existing subscriber, you can go to portal.office.com. Once you sign in, click on the little cog up here and select 365 settings. And this page loads up. You can click on software. Remember, 2011 is still available. Word, Excel, PowerPoint are not ready in the market yet. The free preview is available. So you can still download 2011, all the Office apps, including Outlook. And down here, you see the new version. With every update that we put out, we update this page too. So if you're starting now, you're getting the latest version when you go to the site. And once you install it, you get the Microsoft Auto Update prompting every month when we ship an update. And the last thing I wanted to show you here was the free preview. As I said, search for Office for Mac Preview. Here's a page that loads up. It explains all the apps and what you can expect in there. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, and Outlook, all of them are included. So try that out. Okay, now let's take a look at something that you're familiar with. Here's 2011. To me, it looks old. Couple of quick things I'll point out because it'll make sense when I switch to the 2016 version. We've done a bunch of work around the user experience, as I mentioned. The ribbon is completely updated. The item list, even specific things like the attributes that are laid out. You can see that we show the subject and then the sender. That stuff is updated, so it looks more familiar if you're coming from Windows Outlook. Things like if you flag an email, notice how the text is red. That part's changed. The preview pane on the right, the information on all the attributes that are displayed, those are shuffled around, and intentionally, because we want the app to feel more familiar. And we get a lot of people using multiple clients, so you might be using Windows Outlook and using Mac Outlook too. It'll start to feel very familiar. I won't go through all the modules here. You guys know how this looks. But here's a look at the calendar. You see all the calendar tiles. As I said, most of them look this shade of gray or blue. And if you apply categories, that's how it shows up. So with that, let me switch over to the new Outlook. Here it is. So as I said, the app, especially if you're coming from Windows Outlook, will immediately feel very familiar. Here's the brand new ribbon up here. And things that you would expect similar to 2011 still work, obviously. So you can expand and collapse that. The quick access toolbar is on the top still, the undo, redo, and print options there. And the platform appropriate part that I mentioned plays into certain things like we don't want everything to look like Windows Outlook. We want it to be platform appropriate too. So you see the placement of the search bar is on the right top corner, like you would find in Finder or Apple Mail, and that's intentional. For folks who are coming from Windows Outlook, we do get mixed feedback about the placement of the search bar. So if you have questions or thoughts on that, talk to me after, because I'm interested in your feedback. The item list itself, you can see that the placement of the attributes that I mentioned are changed, very similar to Windows Outlook. You see the sender list first, and then the subject, and then there is a one-line preview included now. Of course, if you're on a smaller MacBook Air and you want to turn that preview off, you can turn it off if you like the compact view. Personally, I like it with the one-line preview turned on. And I talked about the database replacement where we remove the guts and replace the database, but the actual items are still stored on the file system, and the primary reason for that is Spotlight. So mail items still show up. Oh, one other note here, you can run 2011 and 2016 side by side. I'm running it right now. Both are connected to the same account. So you're not going to stomp on each other or anything. So if you're just trying it out or want to try it out, put it side by side. It should work. And when only nuances that you'll need to be aware of is Spotlight obviously will pick up both 2011 and 2016 results. That's the only kind of minor thing that you have to be aware of. Okay, coming back into the mail item list. This mailbox is not very big, but if you have my work email address, in my inbox I have about 50,000 items. So that's exactly where the work went in for the performance of such large mailboxes. 2011, you probably, if you're supporting your organization, you probably tell them not to do that. We push it, of course. The app will feel much more fluid. As I said, we have changed the guts of how the UI talks to the database and the item list, because this is where we think users spend majority of their time in your mail item list. And in addition to the performance, very similar to what you see on Windows Outlook, there are triage actions that show up right when you hover on it. So you can select, hover on an item, you can either delete or flag it, and that works exactly as you would expect it. On the preview side, you see that the information is changed here. There is a new presence indicator. I think my browser session probably timed out here. So if Garrett were logged in, which OA will hopefully trigger, you'll see the presence indicator light up. And things that you would expect, like it did in 2011, the contact card's still there. You can interact and start a conversation or schedule a meeting and so on. Okay. The second part that I mentioned earlier is push mail. So let's go to Garrett's mailbox and fire off an email. And one thing to note is that if you're not actively looking at Outlook when the mail notification pops in, you see that the new version popped in. Let's wait and see when 2011 catches up. Come on. Okay. I won't wait for it. There it comes. One nice thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that if you're browsing in Safari or whatever, and you're not looking at Outlook, you can go to the notification center and look at all your missed notifications. Like? Okay. And of course, very similar to the item list, you see a very similar set of information. You see the subject, the sender, and the one-line preview there. Okay, switching back into Outlook. So I mentioned the category support. So you see that this mail is categorized. You see the category pills show up here. When I click on Edit Categories, you'll see an updated experience here. It is per account. So this is an Exchange account. So if you change anything here, it'll sync back to the service. So I'm going to change this purple category to actually be purple. Okay. In a few seconds, I'll go back into OVA and see if that actually synced up. And the other part is around signatures. People who use signatures use it a lot. Here's an updated experience for signatures. It is applicable per account. You can create multiple signatures like you could in the past. But the nice thing here is also that you can have separate signatures for new mail versus reply, which is handy.
Is it full HTML aware?
You can drag images into it.
Can you color, underline, like will it brand your signature like you could like you can in Windows version?
So the question is, can you color and apply HTML formatting to it on the signature? That part I'll have to double check. I know we support images, so if you're a salesperson, you have like your company logo and things like that, that part definitely works. So that was a new mail. So you see that when I click a reply, I get the shorter version of the signature. Okay. The next thing I wanted to show was Office apps. So as I mentioned earlier, these are the same HTML and JavaScript apps that are deployed on your service. So regardless of the endpoint, whether you're in Outlook Web Access, Windows Outlook, or Mac Outlook, they behave the same way. So let me find some, and the bar that shows the HTML app lights up if there is context. So it is context aware. So if you have an address in there, it'll try and light up. So let me see, conference address, here you go. So in this case, the app figured out that there is an address in there. So the Bing Maps app, HTML app loaded up. You click on that. This part will feel very familiar if you go to OVA or Windows Outlook. So the Maps app actually loaded up there. So let me switch into the browser here. Just going to refresh. So here you go. The category color that I changed propagated up. Purple actually became purple across endpoints. And if I go to the conference address, okay, I'm going to skip this part. Okay, the next part is around archive support. As I mentioned, we support online archives. So when you go to add your account, this part will feel very familiar for 2011 users. You add your account, there is no additional authentication required. If your mailbox is archive enabled, we automatically configure that. It shows up in your navigation pane just like you would expect it. Thank you. And this part actually is all online. So when I clicked on that folder, it's actually doing an online query. And it's pretty performant. So I'd love for you guys to try that out and let us know. We've tried it with a couple thousands of mails, and it's pretty performant. So even though it's going against the service, and it's making a network call at that point. And things that you would expect obviously work. The categories obviously sync up. So here's a mail that's categorized. And search also works as you would expect. So it's doing an online search here. One note on the online search part here, it is not the same. If you attended the Windows Outlook session, they talked about the new online search. This is not the same. This is used only for online archive. We are not using online search for the regular mailbox yet. We will get there. Okay. So next, let's switch into the calendar. So I'm going to pick a meeting request that came in. This is very familiar, of course, much better looking than 2011. But you see a new button pop up there on the right-hand side. It says propose new time. Click on that, pulls up a sheet. And as you would expect with a regular calendar meeting, you do see the FreeBusy information. You can interact with it by clicking and reducing the time or proposing a different date and so on. There you go. You click send, and there goes the alternate proposal. That pinging sound was from the other account that I'm logged into. So with that interaction in the mail was the attendee view. So somebody sent me a request, so I'm attending the meeting so I can propose a new time. If you're scheduling a meeting, by default, it's selected to allow proposals. What that means is when you send the meeting request out, attendees can suggest a different time or decline and suggest a time. That's exactly as you would expect it. Of course, there might be some times where you want to turn it off. You're calling a large meeting and you don't want people to send you proposals, you can turn that off. And there is a preference. If you go to Outlook Preferences, And calendar, you can see the toggle there for unchecking this. This is checked by default. So it will allow the proposals by default. And the second thing I want to point out here is, you see the preference there? We have weather and calendar. Interestingly, we get a lot of positive feedback on this. So with that, I'm going to switch into the calendar module. Up here, you see that it detected that I'm in Chicago, and there is a 3-day forecast. The rest of the UX obviously looks much more updated. The tiles are looking nicer than it did in 2011. And I mentioned calendar color, so here's what you do. If you don't like the default color that it picked, you can go pink. Thank you. And I mentioned the side-by-side calendar. So the scenario for side-by-side calendar, which some of you might appreciate more than others, is primarily a delegation scenario. So if I'm a delegate for some other person and I'm managing the calendar, then it's very convenient to see that side-by-side. We did not support that in 2011, and it has been a long requested ask. It's not limited to that. If you have a personal and a work calendar, you can, of course, see that side-by-side too. And in fact, this is the new default. So if I click on this family calendar, it loads up side-by-side. As I mentioned, this is up to 3 calendars. After that, we switch back to the overlay mode. I can also switch to, if you don't like this for some reason, you can also toggle this and collapse it to the overlay mode. And as you would expect, this actually works across all the views that we support. So I can go, by default, we are in week view. I can switch to the work week. Of course, that works. Switch to the day view, and it's still as you would expect. One difference here is that in month view, the information density is quite high. So when you actually switch to month, it collapses into the overlay mode. This part is a little different than how Windows Outlook behaves. After 4 calendars, Windows Outlook falls to a schedule view. We don't have that. We just do side-by-side and overlay. And of course, if you switch back to one of the views that supports side-by-side, it snaps back up. So as I mentioned, we are a communications app, so accessibility becomes quite important. So if you're a user that cares about this, or you have users in your organization that you're supporting that care about this, this part might come very handy as voiceover support.
Voiceover on Outlook, calendar, window. From May 3, 2015 to May 10, 2015, 16 events, scroll area has keyboard focus.
So one thing you notice as the thing is playing, if you've heard this in the past, the information that
you are currently on a scroll area. To begin interacting with the contents of this scroll area, press May 4, 2015, 11:00 a.m. to 12:00, voiceover off.
So I can tab through with my keyboard while it's reading, and the information that it's reading is pertinent to the meeting that I picked. And we fixed some quirks with the keyboard navigation. So I'm on the first meeting on Monday here, so if I tab, it goes to the next appointment on my calendar on the same day, as you would expect. And of course, that plays well with VoiceOver too. So if you're using that, then it's reading the relevant information. Okay, with that, let's switch and take a look at people. Again, an experience that's been quite revamped here. We have the contact pictures in the item list. The information displayed here has been adjusted. So if you have a contact that does not have a certain piece of information, we automatically pick another relevant piece. As you can see, some of the contacts, I have phone number listed here, some of them are emails, and it picks the right one based on what's available. And the presence bar is available here too. Right now, none of these show signed in, but you see that this other account that I was using, Garrett, he's showing us yellow because it's in the Firefox browser. And the other thing, of course, very similar to the item list, the triage controls that I mentioned, the delete and flag. I'll take your question in just a second. The delete and flag that I mentioned, very similar behavior here. When I hover on something where the information is relevant, it lights up. So in this case, this contact does not have email address, so that's grayed out. But if I hover on this one, I can just click on that button and start a new email with that person. Question?
When will they change it so you have side by side? If you take a shared set of contacts, it mixes it with your contacts, and then you don't know which is the shared and which isn't.
That's an interesting question. Can I follow up with you after the session? The question was around shared contacts. for folks on the live view. All right, I'm going to quickly go through tasks and notes. There is not that much change in this area. These are the next set of things we pick up. But you do have the completely updated UX here with the retina icons and so on. So I'm quickly show you the notes as well. So this part is very familiar, but updated user experience. With that, let me talk about a few things that come up as questions if you've attended other Windows Outlook or Exchange sessions. We've talked a lot through this week, or so far this week, about a couple of key areas. One is clutter. So this is the automatic triage that the service does for you and moves it to a clutter folder. So we do not support the verbs around this. That is, we don't have support for marking something as clutter yet. But the nice thing about clutter is that all the magic of determining whether an item is clutter or not is done on the service. And it just goes into a folder. So the folder lights up. So if you have other clients that, like OA that you're using to manage your inbox, and things getting moved into clutter, you can access that in Mac Outlook. It's right there. It behaves like just any other folder. What we are working on is the ability to mark stuff as clutter and mark something as not clutter. That'll come in a future update. The second part is around groups. There was a lot of coverage so far on the notion of modern groups, or the groups that are intended for teams, where you create a lightweight group for interactions. You get a shared mailbox, and so on. The way it lights up here, again, this is something that we'll be working on in a future update. We don't have that yet. But if you do get emails sent to the group, they do show up, and they behave like any other email. So this was a group that was created in Windows Outlook. It shows up in OA. On Mac Outlook, you just get the email part of it. And the third part that I want to touch on was the attachments in the cloud. There is a session later this afternoon going into depth about that as well. I think it's at 4 p.m. Lots of investment here, essentially taking your attachments, rather than making a classic attachment where you attach the file. There is ability to push it off to OneDrive. And even when you're sending attachments out, you have an option to promote a local attachment and push it to OneDrive and send it as a link instead, so the recipient can collaborate with you and automatically permissions it. So the way it works here is that we do not have the support to be able to add that. So when you go to compose a mail, you still get the file system dialog here, because this is not lit up yet. But if somebody sends you a cloud attachment, it does light up in Mac Outlook as well. So that's essentially an HTML blob that's sent out. So you see the UX looks very similar to what it does on the other clients. One difference being that since the work is not done here in this area yet, it shows up inline in the body rather than in the attachment well, but it behaves exactly the same. It's a link, so you can click on the link and it'll take you to the browser as you would expect. Okay? So that was the demo portion of my session. So let me switch back to the slide deck. Okay. So I told you about what we did in terms of getting to the October release and what we've been working on since then. So where do we go from here? Of course, Outlook for a Mac is a key investment for us. Lots of emphasis here. We are thinking about the feature set that we add going forward in 3 buckets. The first bucket, as I mentioned, Outlook is a service-connected app. So we will be a first-class app, client app for 365 and Outlook.com. Where we are today is that Outlook.com is still an IMAP connection, so you only get mail. There is lots of requests to introduce calendar and contact support. We definitely have that on our list of things to tackle. That's an example of a service-connected feature. And as I mentioned just now, clutter, groups, those are also very important. All those fall in the service bucket. The second one is enterprise features. Anything to support enterprise deployments. Things like two-factor auth and things like that fall into that bucket. And the third one is the feature set. So this third one is probably our biggest bucket, because we get a lot of requests essentially around things that are already available on Windows Outlook. and that's where most of the requests come in. Things like voting buttons or things like that come up. So what I want to point out here is that we will continue implementing those high demand features. As I showed, like we picked up side by side, it's out there already. We picked up proposed new time, that's out there, and we'll continue going down that list. The second part is around the platform appropriate features. One of the highest requested features right now is full screen support. Yes, it's on our list. We'll get to it in a future update. And the last bucket is all the new areas that I just talked about, groups and so on. Before I kind of get to the resources part, I wanted to touch upon some questions that come up fairly frequently. As I mentioned earlier on, 365 subscription is used only for activation. After that, you can connect to an on-prem server for Exchange. And we've updated the supported version there. So unlike 2011, now we support Exchange 2010 Service Pack 2 and above. So if you run into errors connecting to your server, that is probably the cause if you're trying to connect to an Exchange on-prem server. And the second part, this is applicable to the entire Office suite on the Mac. The minimum OS that we require is Yosemite 1010 and above. And the last part I wanted to share is what I mentioned earlier on. How do you share feedback with us? A couple of venues. As I said, we do have a brand new telemetry system, so we do get feedback if you opted in. In addition to that, the way you think about the first two buckets, those are forums. There is a 365 community forum, and there is an answers forum. If you're a 365 customers, odds are you probably end up at the community site. Mac Outlook is up there. So if you're running into issues with connection or crashes or things like that that you want to post, definitely post it there. Our team is actively monitoring these sites. And same thing with answers. If you have actual bugs and things that you're running into, that's where you go. The third bucket there is very new. Actually, we just went live with this like a week and a half ago. We now have a user voice site for several Outlook endpoints, and Mac Outlook is in there. If you guys don't know what user voice is, it's a third-party site where you can go suggest features and vote on them. So we've started seeding this list. Actually, I'm doing it. Based on what we've already heard about. So things like CalDAV support for downloading your Gmail calendar, or CardDAV support, or voting buttons, things like that are starting to appear there. Spread the word out. If you're in an org and you get suggestions or feature requests, please post it up there, because that's one big channel that we're going to use to get your feedback that helps us prioritize that high-value bucket that I mentioned. So if voting buttons is important, tell us about it. And the last thing is Twitter. If you mention Outlook for Mac, or if you do hashtag Outlook for Mac, our PM team is monitoring that. So that channel I would use if you have things that are not bugs that you would report on forums, but you have like a quick question. One of the examples there is the Exchange version support. That comes up on Twitter quite a bit. So if you have questions, do tweet at us, and we will take a look. And I'm going to open it up for Q&A, but the last thing I want to mention is that Rob, me, and a couple of other folks from OVA, Windows Outlook, and mobile endpoints, we're going to be at the Unplugged session. This is at 9 a.m. on Thursday. So if you don't get to all your questions here, we'll be at this session answering questions, as well as Rob and I will be at the Outlook booth through the remainder of the week. Okay? Would you mind if could you walk up to the mic, please? That way it'll be easier for everyone to hear. Thank you. Okay.
In this version, are you allowing SharePoint calendars to be added into, be able to import them in?
Not yet.
Not yet? Is that something you guys are working on?
It's on our list.
Okay.
As I mentioned, as you can expect, between the three buckets, the list is pretty long.
Sure.
So things like this that come up, if it's high value, if it bubbles up on user voice, absolutely come sooner than later.
Okay.
Thank you.
The calendar sharing permissions with the Windows version run into lots of issues with that. People trying to share like a sub-calendar. With 2011, you can't do it.
Right.
Without sharing everything.
Right. That part hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed.
You have to share the root calendar. That is a good question, though.
Big problem.
We'll add it to the list.
Yes.
We have a very long list.
How about meeting rescheduling? We tend to have a lot of like crashes around that, or not all the recipients receive the reschedule, or it just disappears from your calendar.
Yes.
So a lot of investment in that area. What I would suggest is try out the new version if you haven't. And that's where I mentioned the 2 timelines, right? We are updating 2011, but our focus is on the new version. So if you're using the new version and you see any issues, definitely pass the feedback through us through the forums or answers, and then we'll definitely take a look at those.
I mean, specifically for things like crashing or issues around calendar items disappearing, we have fixed an enormous number of things in those areas. Can't guarantee we fixed every single last thing, but it should be a vastly improved experience.
And the same thing goes for some of the other scenarios like delegation. We've taken key issues there and fixed those.
Okay. And integration with Lync or Skype beyond just presence, the ability to, schedule a online meeting, that sort of thing, and a little more.
You can schedule an online meeting if you're signed in. I didn't get to that, but yeah, when you go to the meeting schedule, you can create an online meeting. All it requires is that you have to be signed into Lync. Good question. Hello.
Hi, I have a question about archive formats, local archive formats. Is there support for PST and OST files in the Mac version now?
You can import a PST. We don't have any export options yet.
Oh.
Any thoughts about having the ability to open additional mailboxes?
So like as in like separate exchange profiles, or
inside that profile, opening additional mailboxes, like how would you have it in the PC version?
You can add additional accounts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Accounts just inside the same view. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a single profile. You load up. You go to the accounts dialog that I showed. You do the little plus sign and then add an extra account. Yeah.
Just to kind of fully answer the question, you can have multiple accounts in the same view. One area of future investment is more about identity management, which is not quite conceptually the same as an account. It's not great right now. It's one of the things that we're working on improving.
Okay.
I think this is more of a general outlook question, but one thing we have is we have a couple companies, or we're developing another company. So we don't have the ability to have multiple reply from addresses without adding another Office 365 account, which is, is that, I know that's not just Mac specific, but is there a way to, is that something they're looking to add? That you can have obviously multiple aliases, but to be able to be replied from, you have to have another account.
That part is still the same.
Yeah, I think that's the only way that I know of that you can do it currently.
Is that something they're considering, though?
It's not on our list. But
well, not your list, but just
not currently, but we can certainly add it to the list. Maybe we can connect at the booth or afterwards and just get a better sense of what exactly you're looking for.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi. Can you do a recover deleted items in the new version?
No, not yet.
Okay, that answered that.
Any other? Is that a limitation? The recover deleted items? No, I don't believe so.
I think it's just further down the road.
Yeah, it's further down on the list. Thanks for the excellent question.
Just
going to pass on
one thing to just mention as well, that I think it was kind of implicit in what Sundar talked about, but I think it's important for you guys to know. As we move towards shipping this new version, we now ship updates every month. So there's not this like several year wait anymore to be able to get new Exchange features. So the list is long, but it will be gradually chipped away at month over month over month. So you should see things lighting up a lot more quickly than you're used to.
Yeah, you don't have to wait 4 years.
Yeah. Go on, keep on throwing them in.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, I really like the new preview, so thanks for that. I was wondering, are you gonna?
You're gonna get a T-shirt for that. Just saying that.
All right.
Oh, I didn't make it all.
I'll go get it in a second. I was wondering, are you gonna put in the send to OneNote, especially in the calendar? It's really good for meeting notes.
It's definitely on the list.
Yeah, that's on the list. Now that we have a OneNote for Mac client, there's really no reason to not be pursuing that feature.
I have a question. Where can we get training information on Mac for Office, just for end users?
Training for Office for Mac? That's a good question. I don't think Microsoft provides any. I mean, we have an online assistance platform that gives you information about how to use our products. But are you looking for hands-on training?
Yes.
I think that would have to be done through third parties if Microsoft doesn't actually provide any.
Services does. Premier Services does.
Oh, as part of your enterprise agreement? Yeah.
So a follow-up question, that export to PSD, is that in the cards? Is that on your list?
Export is definitely on the list.
Okay.
Exactly what formats that we have to figure out.
Right.
But yeah, more import and export options are definitely on the list.
Right. Another follow-up question to the Exchange Web Services as far as this iteration of the Mac client, and working with Exchange. I know in the past there's been some performance issues. Has that kind of been remediated? It's been a little while since I looked at, the old version to the new version, so.
Performance in terms of like syncing with Exchange through the web services?
Correct.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of performance improvements both on the client and on the service side for that.
Okay.
As Sundar mentioned, on the client side, the client itself is a lot snappier because we're not kind of holding up operations while we're doing everything in a single-threaded manner.
Gotcha.
And on the client side, we have push now as well coming down, which increases the speed at which you get your initial syncs.
Okay, cool.
Can you talk about the ability to read encrypted emails?
Yes. IRM, updated support for that. One new addition there is we support RMS Online as well. So yeah, definitely supported.
Another quick feature request?
Yep.
Resizing images inside.
Yes, that's very high on our list.
Good question. Yes.
Thank you.
Do me a favor and please add that to the user voice too. I don't think it's on the list there. But the more people that suggest ideas there, the others vote, we get a better sense of what people are looking for.
So this may be more of an Exchange-specific question. Right now in our environment, if you are setting up delegation for people, you have to set up the delegation from within Outlook itself. And we would like the ability to be able to set it up from within like OA instead of needing to set up an Outlook client for so many different accounts that we set up.
Would you do me a favor and stop by our Outlook booth? Exchange is right next to us. I'll introduce you to the right people that you can talk to about that.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we build a lot of add-ins on Windows around the Outlook object model for trapping send events and adding metadata X headers and stuff like that. Is there any possibility of doing that in the future on the Mac version?
Looking ahead, it's Office apps. So it's the HTML5 and JavaScript apps that I showed. That's the way to do it if you want cross-platform support.
Will that give us that level of integration, though?
Yeah, it's identical support for what will be in the future of that specific platform. We'll have identical support between Mac Outlook and Windows Outlook. But for the add-ins that you're currently creating, I assume you're probably using Visual Basic or something like that. Those will probably not be on our roadmap.
Yeah, I mean, it's just managed code.
Or even through managed, yeah.
Well, some are C++ as well. Yeah.
And that's as much a platform limitation as it is a limitation of Outlook on the Mac.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm not sure how many other people are having this problem, but it seems like the text size is different between Windows and Mac. So if you're going to choose like Arial 10 on Windows, it's 13 on a Mac.
The part that we have on the list is to be able to improve the editing experience. Today it's limited because it's a web-based editor, and you don't get things like that, or you don't get things like inserting tables and things like that. So that is one chunk of item for us to improve the editor.
It's probably the most comprehensively discussed part of the difference between the experience on both, is the difference in editing and consuming. Without getting too deep into the technology that backs it, basically Windows Outlook uses Microsoft Word as its editor, and we use Apple's WebKit as our editor. And so we're investigating if we would want to use Microsoft Word, but unfortunately that would cause us to have to give up a lot of the HTML fidelity we have today. So we're really being very careful about this one. We understand the pain, and we are going to improve it. We just haven't figured out exactly how to do it yet.
Okay, thanks.